couple of years ago, I took part in what Joystick's Mike Suzek dubbed the 4 in February Challenge. Essentially, the idea is to choose 4 games that you've never gotten around to playing, and just knuckle down and finish the damn things. It's a terrific challenge for people like me who have a depressing backlog of games to finish, and I was more than happy to take the opportunity to increase my knowledge of the digital art form that I love so much. I chose Kingdoms of Amalur, Reckoning, Reciteer, Dead Space, and Psychonauts. I know, I never got around to playing Psychonauts. Bad indie gamer, bad, no biscuit for me. But to be fair, I'm far from the only one who never played that. Anyhow, I started with Kingdoms of Amalur, Reckoning, and promptly gave up on the rest of my challenge that month. Why? Because I started with Kingdoms of Amalur, Reckoning. That game is massive. I've heard that it racks upwards to 200 hours of gameplay, and after beating the main storyline and several side stories without a relief in sight, I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest. For anyone who doesn't know, Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning is a third-person action RPG that was released in 2012. The epic fantasy love child of 38 studios and big huge games, it is a work of incredible scope, helmed by some of the biggest names in the geek playbook. It was almost universally adored by critics, and sold well over 1 million copies. Oh, and it also drained the finances of Rhode Island like a bachelorette party at the Fireball Factory. Welcome back to Geek History, a series where I'll address various geek topics with panache, brio, and a thesaurus that is 30 years out of date. Today's topic is Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning, the game that mugged Rhode Island. Let's start from the beginning. In 2006, former Major League pitcher and World Series champion Curtis Schilling decided that he wanted to open a games studio. For a man who had made his mark almost entirely in the world of baseball, this might have seemed a little out of left field. See, we can do baseball jokes on this show. But those who know him personally had a better idea. An Avalon Hill games enthusiast, Schilling's love of war games like Advanced Squad Leader was huge, causing him to go so far as to pony up the cash to create an annual event, and even found a magazine dedicated to ASL. He was also an avid Everquest fan, and even wrote reviews for PC Gamer magazine. He founded Green Monster Games, which was changed to 38 Studios a year later, named for his iconic jersey number. Eager to break into the world of massive multiplayer online role-playing games like his beloved Everquest, Schilling announced Project Copernicus in 2008. Funding, however, was an issue. While emulating smash hits like World of Warcraft is always the carrot dangling at the end of the string, the MMO game is a difficult one to break into. A recession was on, and Schilling was having trouble finding anyone who would help fund his passion project. And an MMO is one thing, but when your game sports the writing of fantasy legend R.A. Salvatore, the artwork of Spawn creator Todd McFarlane, the design of Morrowind veteran Ken Rolston, and the music of Banjo-Kazooie's Grant Kirkhope, you're going to need all the financial backing you can get. Enter Rhode Island.
We're off on the road to Rhode Island. We're having the time of our lives.
Hoping to encourage economic growth in their state, the government of Rhode Island offered a $75 million loan to 38 studios after Schilling and Company promised to base their offices in the Ocean State and employ 450 workers, thus boosting the economy and spreading the good news of fantasy RPGs to the home state of such luminaries as H.P. Lovecraft, Meredith Vieira, and Peter Griffin. The dream was starting to look like a reality. As the development of Project Copernicus continued, it occurred to Schilling's team that it might be a good idea to put something out, given that financial advisors had suggested that the studio would need a huge success every 2 years to keep their heads above water, particularly since the staff, hours, and enormous scope of the game they were designing largely guaranteed that they were always hemorrhaging money. A best-selling game every 2 years, though, is crazy for a brand new company. The only people who can usually pull off those sorts of consecutive hits are the old men of gaming, the people who've been around for a while and amassed enormous multi-country teams. Your Ubisofts, your Activisions. Selling several million copies of a new franchise from a brand new developer? I mean, Minecraft pulled it off. Why not 38 Studios? Well, possibly because no one knew a damn thing about Copernicus. It had some heavy hitters, but so did the Lone Ranger, and you don't hear about Johnny Depp aching to wear a dead bird on his head anytime soon, do you? So 38 Studios decided to develop and release an introduction to their world, a nibble on the main course, if you will. That nibble was Kingdoms of Amalur: Reckoning.
We are no longer slaves to the whims of fate.
Released in 2012, Amalur was an enormous action RPG experience. The combination of 38 Studios' MMO planning and an RPG that had been under development by Big Huge Games, which 38 Studios acquired in 2009. It was colorful, it was well written, and the critics seemed to really appreciate what it was bringing to the table. It wasn't about to break molds or anything, but what the world got was a nice, solid game. However, breaking molds was exactly what 38 Studios needed if it was going to do anything to keep from drowning. Almost immediately, you could see that money was going to be a key factor in this game. Early criticism of the game came from extra quests being held behind a paywall of an online pass. Sort of a precursor to the controversial Day 1 DLC that so many people decry in games today. It left people with a bad first impression, as if 38 Studios had made it clear from the get-go that they planned on nickel and diming their customers to death. As if this wasn't bad enough, people didn't seem to be buying the game. Many point to a poor marketing plan, which largely consisted of a demo that even Schilling himself said had more bugs in it than a demo ever should. But whatever the case, Kingdoms of Amalur sold a mere 330,000 copies after its first month of release. After 90 days, Schilling reported that the game had sold 1.2 million, but that was a far cry from the 3 million copies that 38 Studios would require to satisfy their investors. Between what they owed the state and the debt they had incurred from various other creditors, 38 Studios was over $150 million in the hole. The whole thing imploded. And it imploded fast. In February, Kingdoms of Amalur was released. In March, 38 Studios stopped paying for its employees' health benefits, which were shut off in May. That same month, 38 Studios sent a loan check of over $1 million to the state of Rhode Island, and it bounced. A week later, 38 Studios shut down, laying their entire staff off in a mass email. Schilling himself claims to have lost $50 million of his own money in the endeavor. The aftermath was a series of lawsuits and investigations as everyone involved attempted to squeeze what little blood they could from a state-funded stone. It was ugly. In 2014, Rhode Island settled their lawsuit with Curtis Schilling's ill-fated studio to the tune of $4.4 million, and an additional $12 million was awarded in 2016. Further investigation by the federal government has shown that the loans themselves were mishandled, which had led to further lawsuits and investigations, creating a perfect Ouroboros of defaulted loans and legal fees. The circle of life, ladies and gentlemen. So what went wrong? It's tough to say. Curt Schilling blames Governor Lincoln Chafee, while the governor blames Schilling and his mishandling of the company. People aren't exactly stepping forward to take the blame on this one. But if I had to take a stab at it, I'd suggest that it's the scope of Kingdoms of Amalur, and Copernicus by extension, that ultimately did it in. Now there's nothing wrong with an epic game. The Elder Scrolls, Warcraft, The Witcher, these are the universes that grab the imagination with both hands and shake until all you can see are endless magical forests and magic missiles. Those games are sublime, But those games all have something in common. They were built up over the years by companies who took chances, made mistakes, and learned lessons from years and years of actually making games. There's no reason to believe that 38 Studios couldn't have created an appropriately epic and immersive world over time, but Schilling didn't want to make it over time. He wanted something enormous and bombastic right the hell now. He'd never created a game of this size before. Hell, he'd never created a game before, and he was going to start with an MMORPG with 10,000 years of lore and history behind it? Unfortunately, even with greats like R.A. Salvatore and Ken Rolston behind you, there's no guarantee that you can capture the imaginations of 3 million players, particularly when there's so many worlds already out there that people love and feel really loyal to. So if you want to make an enormous, fully immersive world, maybe start smaller, and build yourself up in conjunction with the size of your fanbase. But the biggest shame of all? Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning is a really good game. Like, really good. It's colorful, it's in-depth, it has a big, varied world with lots of history behind it, and a control scheme that is damn satisfying to play. It's filled with bugs because of how much they rushed it, but I don't regret in the slightest that I spent my entire February playing it. It is disappointing, however, to know that there won't be any more of these games, and that there might have been if 38 Studios knew how to moderate a little better. It's a genuinely engaging and fun game, and like I said before, it isn't any kind of game changer, it's just a lot of fun. And there's nothing wrong with a lot of fun. Just try to avoid spending $150 million on it. You can still find copies of Kingdom of Amalur at your local used game store, and it's generally pretty inexpensive on Steam. I highly recommend playing it. I'm sure the people of the Ocean State appreciate it. Hell, I'm surprised every copy doesn't come with a signed thank you letter from its taxpayers. It's worth a look, so get a copy, load it up, and bask in the glow of the game that mugged Rhode Island.
Would you like to know more?
There have been a lot of people who wrote about Kingdoms of Amalur and Curtis Schilling and 38 Studios, about its downfall, about its highs, its lows, the laws that have been broken, the lawsuits that have come since. There's plenty to read about on the internet, but if I had to point you in the direction of one article in particular that you must read if you're interested in learning more about this subject, I would have to say you would find it in Boston Magazine. Jason Schwartz wrote a very in-depth piece about the entire event. He wrote it in August 2012, so it was kind of fresh in people's minds. He tells the human side of it. He goes very, very far into what happened, what went wrong. And he doesn't paint a nasty picture of anyone in particular in this. It's a very complicated story, and it's really easy to go and put Curt Schilling in a corner and call him a real villain here. And he did make mistakes, and that much is obvious, but like I said, it's a very complex story, and I would definitely recommend going to Boston Magazine and checking that out. A little bit more on the side of the game itself, Gama Sutra wrote a very interesting post-mortem on Kingdoms of Amalur, detailing what they believe that it did right, what it did wrong. It's a really interesting look. It's not quite a game review per se, but it really dissects the game and kind of tries to find out what they may have done differently if 38 Studios had a chance to do anything differently at all, but sadly they didn't. And of course, Cracked Magazine got in there. The article was 5 Craziest Ways Creators Ruined Awesome Video Games by Ian Urie, Steve Athens, Ed Stevens, and Gavin Jameson. And guess what? Kingdoms of Amalur and Curt Schilling's horrible, horrible downfall is detailed there in hilarious, hilarious detail. It isn't very long, but it's worth taking a look at, and I know a lot of you read Cracked anyway. And of course, you could always shell out the money for the actual game. Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning really is solid, guys. If you're into the combat style of Zelda 64 and Fable, but want something really deep and complex, and something you can really sink your teeth into without spending $15 a month on a MMO or buying the latest $60 epic fantasy, whatever. Usually on Steam you can get it for $20, definitely less during a Steam sale, and of course all the DLC that they eventually developed is in there too. It's worth your time, and I think you'd really enjoy it. Thank you all so much for joining me on my second episode of Geek History. If you enjoyed this one, might I suggest backing up a little bit and taking a look at the first episode, where I cover the topic of Dungeons & Dragons and the Satanic Panic of the 1980s. I really hope you enjoyed watching this, and if you have any suggestions for topics you'd like me to cover in the future, please leave them in the comments. Otherwise, I really would love any likes or subscribes you folks can throw my way. And in the meantime, I will see you guys tomorrow. Bye-bye.
If Daddy don't sink a little drinky, Daddy gets sad and blue. Sneak a little drinky, sneakity-doo. Sneak a little drinky past you. Sneak a little drinky, sneakity-doo. Sneak a little drinky past you. Sneak a little drinky, sneakity-doo, la-di-da-di-da-da-da.